We've been looking at some things that Christians are encouraged to do. And we're asking the question, what's the point? What is the point? Is there a good reason? Is there a benefit to things like reading the Bible? What's the point in doing that? Is it worth meeting together and building community? Is it a good investment to pray and spend time with God? And what we've been discovering is that these are, I hope you've been discovering this, these are great life tools. And if they are prioritized and if they are practiced, then they grow us. They keep us not only connected to God, which is great, but they keep us connected really well to each other. And they bring focus, they bring clarity, they bring balance to our lives. They keep us on track, they keep us on God's agenda to see His kingdom come and His amazing will being done here on earth as it is in heaven. These activities, they engage us in a supernatural life beyond the ordinary and the expected. That's what they do. You don't look like you believe me, but that's what they do. They do. And today, as we bring this series to a close, I want us to think about what's the point when it comes to following Jesus. I've just been singing, I have decided to follow Jesus. What does that mean? What's the point of it? What even is a Christian? Why would somebody call themselves that? Or even be interested in a man who lived 2,000 years ago? I mean, what possible relevance could he have to my life here in the 21st century? Well, before I try and unpack that a little bit and explain it, I just want to invite Jill up. Jill's going to come and just share with you just a bit of her story, a bit of why she believes that following Jesus has made a difference to her. Let's give her a welcome. Come on.
Thank you. I am having an out-of-body experience because I'm completely deaf in this ear today. Don't know why. So in my head, I'm really loud. Can you hear me, though? Cool. Am I shouting? Fine. I'll try and pitch it there. So, hi, I'm Jill, and I'm an introvert. So I grew up in a happy family, the third child of 4. My mum and dad were married for 60 years before my dad died. One of my grandmas was a Christian, and my mum took us to church. And as a child, I loved church. The singing and the talks given in Sunday school, I can actually still remember some of those. I was a happy child. I skipped along. I skipped. And I sang happy songs. When I was 8, my Christian grandma died. As a child, I spent a lot of time around a stage. My dad was an amateur producer and comedic actor, so performance was something to be admired. I often went to pantomimes, and I don't know if they still do this. I hope they don't. But when I was young, children were invited up onto the stage, but usually there were too many, and some were sent back to their seats. And the lucky ones, who hadn't had to do the walk of shame back to their seats, were asked to sing, and then they were rewarded with a treat. Is this ringing true for anyone? Except for one child who they missed out. And then when it couldn't get more awkward, they'd laugh and say they were joking and bring out a super-duper treat for that child. This child then had to have the wherewithal to say thank you and laugh at that jolly prank that had been pulled as they returned to their seat laden with gifts. I wasn't that child. I would never have been that child. I was the one who wanted to be on the stage but didn't want to be turned away. And I would have been bewildered by the ups and downs of emotions, the humiliation. In fact, I dreaded being given anything unexpectedly because I struggled with social conventions like please and thank you. Not because I didn't want to say these things, but I couldn't fit them in with my emotional responses. Someone might give me something and I'd say, "That's great, I love it." And an adult would say thank you. So I'd say, "Thank you." And I'd think, didn't I just say that? Or I might be asked if I'd like an ice cream, and I'd say, "Yes, I would, that would be great." To be told I should have answered, "Yes, please." I found it difficult to fit the words that were required socially with what I was actually trying to convey. However, I learnt what I had to do, and although a little dull, I found pushing most of my emotions to one side helped me to focus on what I had to do to be acceptable, to perform. I gave up dancing because I was the wrong body shape, apparently, for that. Probably. And concentrated on maths, science, and music exams. At church, when I was 11, I was asked if I wanted to be confirmed, whatever that was, so that I could take communion and stay in the service after the younger children leave. I said, "No, thank you. I'm going to be a scientist." I remember it as if it were yesterday. No one said I could be a scientist and a Christian. And there was no provision for 11-year-olds who weren't confirmed, so I left the church. After that, I relied heavily on performance. I did well at school. My maths prowess was legendary and very much approved of, especially as I was a girl. Thankfully, we've moved on a bit since the 70s. But maths was great for me because I didn't have to engage with emotions. I didn't have to give any part of myself. I just had to work stuff out to arrive at the correct answer. I didn't begin to suspect that I had died inside until I was 17. And no one else seemed to have noticed either. On the outside, I was pretty much the same, but as I tried to relate to others, I felt like an empty shell, with nothing of any substance to give. I fell into a depression at 20, still largely undetected, apart from plummeting university grades, behind a facade created by alcohol and sarcasm. I had ignored God for nearly 10 years, and at my lowest point, I know he reached out to me. I found a small Bible given to me at school and started reading it. Albeit the daily reading plan started me for that day in the middle of the book of Romans, which is a really tricky place to start. He also placed me within a group of people where I could do something highly skilled on my own but totally dependent on others. That could have been a church, but for me at that time, while I was so far away from the idea of church, it was an orchestra. I was an accomplished cellist, but I hadn't played after leaving school. The Bible and the orchestra were like a life support machine for me. It was another 3 years before I went to a church service. And as I stood at the back of the room, I felt like I'd come home. I could breathe on my own again. That was nearly 30 years ago. I'm not going to pretend my life became perfect and I lived happily ever after. In fact, some of the decisions I made early on in my walk with God were terrible and people got hurt. But some things shifted quite quickly. I knew I was loved by God and acceptable. I knew God knew my heart, so I was less concerned about what the world thought of me. And my emotions were unlocked. Over the years, I've tried to follow Jesus. I've valued the word of God in the Bible and clung on to his promises. I've valued the prayers of fellow believers and the corrective challenges of people I trust. Well, okay, I don't think I've ever valued a corrective challenge when it was actually given. But afterwards, once I've got over myself. I've valued the guidance, support, encouragement of good friends in this church, excellent teaching and care when needed. With my church family, as I've followed Jesus, I've faced some serious illness, parenting in difficult circumstances, deaths of loved ones. But I've also known the joy of seeing our family grow and mature with new opportunities and challenges. Personally, following Jesus has led me out of my depth, way out there. And it's exciting. He knows me. He knows what I'm made for. And I know that without him, I wasn't even alive. Jesus breathed life into me. And despite my aging and creaking body, I feel as though I'm skipping on the inside. If you have been, thank you for listening.
You're going to skip off. Go for it. Thanks, Jill. Now, I use the phrase following Jesus as a way to describe what it means to be a Christian, a Christ follower, someone who identifies with Jesus Christ. Because that is the phrase that Jesus himself used. When he called his first disciples, the invitation was, come, follow me. He called out to them, come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. Sounds like a strange thing to say. But some of his first disciples were fishermen. That's what they did for a living. They were not religious scholars. They didn't have much of a status. They were ordinary people. And like us. And Jesus was saying that if you follow me, then things are going to go to a whole new, different level in your life. He says, I will put the skills you have and the things that you do to a higher purpose. You thought your life was just about making a living, fishing for food and a wage, but I'll show you how to make a life, to impact people in an eternal way, not just a temporary way. And if you stick with me, you're going to learn some things that will change your perspective in life and give you real value to your life. I mean, no wonder they dropped their nets and decided to go with him. And those few ordinary, uneducated men, they went on to change the world as we know it. You know, they followed Jesus around for 3 years. And to start with, they were not quick learners, to be honest. They did things like this, that they fell asleep at the time when Jesus wanted them to pray with him. He needed them the most, and they fell asleep. One of them betrayed him to the authorities. They deserted him at the time that he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. One of them disowned even knowing Jesus, swore that he never knew the man when he thought that his own safety was being threatened. They watched Jesus die, and they went into hiding, scared and confused. But then they saw him resurrected from the grave, alive again. And it was then that Jesus said this to them. He said, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. So Jesus, who said he had come to lay down his life for the world, come to seek and to save that which was lost, the one who came to rescue us from the evil one and from death itself, was saying, now that's your job. You go and do it. Go and tell. Go and reach those who don't yet know. Go in the love and the power of God. And those disciples, filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, they did. And the good news began to spread from Jerusalem right around the world, to the point now that, Christianity in 2018 is still the largest religion, with over 2.5 billion people claiming allegiance to Jesus Christ. That is 1/3 of the world's population right now. But it's more than a religion. Let's not see it as that. It's a relationship with God. This was the good news they were spreading, whereby as I follow Jesus, I become more like him. I get to imitate him, to speak like him, to love like him, to live like him, to act like him, to say what he said and do what he did. And it's an incredible way to live. But I have to be straight with you, that this is not actually just about how this benefits me on a human level. Following Jesus is not primarily about what's in it for me. If that's what you make it, then you won't follow Jesus for very long, because it is tough being a Christian. You know, most of those disciples that we read about, they were martyred for their faith in Jesus. And in a recent report made for the organization Open Doors, they've estimated that over 250 million Christians face major persecution in 2018 around the world. That's an awful lot. It's 1 in 12 Christians live in places where it is illegal or forbidden or punished to be a follower of Christ. And even if you don't live in those places, if you've been a Christian for any length of time, I'm sure you'd have found there is some form of sacrifice that comes from following him. This is what Jesus said to his disciples. He said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. I mean, those original fishermen, they gave up literally their whole way of life and their way of doing things in order to go with Jesus. I mean, when Jesus said you need to take up your cross, he wasn't talking about a nice little silver necklace that so many of us just have hanging around our necks. You know, to those listening at the time, they knew that a cross was a device for execution. It was an instrument of death. And to take it up was an act of dying to self, giving up my way so that I can go his way. It's not my comfort or how blessed I feel that is on God's agenda. But he wants me to be free from the tyranny of self and released then to accomplish his will. His will. Following Jesus is an act of surrender. In Romans 12, verse 1 to 2, it says this. It says, so then, my friends, because of God's great mercy to us, I appeal to you. Offer yourselves as a living sacrifice to God, dedicated to his service and to pleasing him. This is the true worship that you should offer. Do not conform yourselves to the standards of this world, but let God transform you inwardly by a complete change of your mind. Then you will be able to know the will of God, what is good and is pleasing to him and is perfect. Good, pleasing, and perfect. Now, when we talk about sacrifice or giving up, doing things your way, none of that might sound very appealing to you. And often the problem is that Christianity is sold, here in the West especially, by look how Jesus can improve your life. Or look what God can do for you. And it's true that he does, and he can, and he does do amazing things. But the truth of the gospel of Jesus is look what God has already done for you, so that you can now be free to live for him. It's a subtle difference. We may well want God to follow us and bless us and listen to us and be at our beck and call. But real life is actually found in following him, in blessing him, in listening to him, in answering his call. You know, I think we've reduced what it means to be a follower, and mainly because of, I think social media has a lot to do with it. You know, on Twitter or Instagram, we have people follow us, don't we? And we decide that we're going to follow somebody else. But nothing is really demanded of us. I mean, here's my status. This is my Twitter profile. Disciple of Jesus. Husband of Rach, father of Wenna, Harry, and Roe, granddad of Reuben, and baby Bump. We have another one on the way. It's good news, isn't it? Due just before Christmas. Pastor of Kingfisher Church, living to see God's kingdom come. That sums me up, I think. Now look, I've got 146 people following. I'm following 146 people. And I have 204 people following me, which actually, on Twitter, that's not really very many. I think if you're Katy Perry, how many have you got? You got something like 80 million or something. I don't know. I don't know. I got 204 people following me. Who knows who they are? I couldn't tell you. But not much is demanded of us when it comes to following people on social media. We just decide who we're going to be receptive to. We just follow people who we're interested in, who we want to know their views. We want to see their pictures on Instagram. And if something particularly good strikes us, then we might share it on. We might like it. We might retweet it. We might copy and paste it. I don't know. But when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to him, he's asking for more than our ears and our eyes and our likes. And yes, say what he says and do as he does, but how about go where he goes? If you were physically trying to follow someone, I think we call it stalking these days, but if you're physically trying to follow somebody in the street, then you're keeping them in your sights and you're going where they are going. You are not setting the route, are you? The person who is leading, the person who you are following is setting where they're going. And often you might not even know where they're going, but you're following them. They're setting the pace. Now, back in the book of Psalms, we see God speaking, and he says, oh, that my people would listen to me. Oh, that Israel would follow me, walking in my paths. So God has paths. God has a way. And he's inviting us to follow him, to follow it. I mean, some of us are feeling pretty conflicted and confused when it comes to faith. Or there's times when we might feel that God is a million miles away from us. And I think it's because that although we might say, I'm a Christian, we're not really following him, if we're honest. I mean, you might come to church, you might say a prayer, but if you looked at the direction of your life, are you still just going your way? Are you still just doing what you want to do? Are you still thinking that you know best? Are you still trying to appease the God of self? I mean, maybe we need to surrender again. Maybe we need to admit actually where we are. Maybe we need to make that turnaround and get a fresh sight of Jesus. Maybe we need to actually start following him. Maybe there are things we need to stop doing so that we can start doing his things. Maybe there are things that are on our agendas that we need to lay down so that we can take up his. Oh, that my people would listen to me. Oh, that Israel would follow me, walking in my paths. You see the history of Israel over the years, if you read the Old Testament. It's a history of God being faithful and calling them to some great things, showing them his promises, showing them where he wanted to lead them. And for moments they did, and then they just decided they were going to do their own thing, and it always ended badly. Always. But it takes trust, doesn't it, to follow somebody completely like that. It takes trust to surrender yourself like that. It takes some faith to follow like that. But it comes from when you know that God loves you, like Jill was saying. When you know that, when it's not just a belief, and when it's not just a thought, when you know it, when you feel it, when you know that you're loved by God, when you know that he's with you, when you understand that he sees the best in you and he wants the best for you, when you get that his will is good and pleasing and perfect, then choosing to follow him becomes a real adventure of faith rather than a chore. Not always easy, but worth the sacrifice. I don't dwell on what I think it's cost me to follow Jesus, because what I've gained is so much greater than what I've lost. And it's so much better with the eternity to come. Let's not forget where we're heading. But dying to self is a struggle for all of us. All of us, without exception. It's a daily struggle. And it's tough in this day and age, especially when everything around us is telling us to live for self. You know, the cult of self is alive and well here in Britain in 2018. And that innate selfish side of us will always rear its head and loudly demand its own way. It's your right. You deserve this. No one should be telling you what to do. But how many of us know that my way is a broken way? My way often leads to mistakes and regrets and guilt and shame and blame. My way often leads to relationship breakdowns and heartbreak. My way, it might well bring a momentary satisfaction or gratification, but it doesn't result in a life well lived, a life of fulfillment, a life with an eternal legacy. You will never get the best that God has for you, and other people will not get the best of you if you go your way. Here's what Jesus said. He said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness. Let that sink in. Because you will have the light that leads to life. Following Jesus brings you out of darkness and into life. What's the point? What's the point of following Jesus? Well, that's it. Right there. You can't follow Jesus and go your own way at the same time. It doesn't work like that. Some of us, though, we only ever serve the cause of me. Enslaved to my own feelings and desires, held hostage by self. And Jesus wants to set you free from that. He wants to release you to live for a cause that is actually worth living for. A cause that is even worth dying for. There is a cost to following Jesus, but think about the cost of not following him. The cost of not following him. Without him, where is your life actually heading in the here and now? Who is your life influencing in an eternal way? And where will you be spending eternity? But I do understand that it's an issue of trust. It's an issue of trust. How do I know that Jesus is worth trusting and following? Well, I heard a story about some Navy SEALs. Now, these aren't animals. These are soldiers who were engaged in a covert operation. They were freeing hostages from a building in some dark part of the world. And the team flew in by helicopter. They made their way to the compound. They stormed into the room where the hostages had been imprisoned for months. And the room was filthy and dark. And the hostages were curled up, terrified. And when the SEALs entered the room, they heard the gasps of the hostages. They stood at the door and called to the prisoners, telling them they were Americans. And the SEALs asked the hostages to follow them. But the hostages wouldn't. They sat there on the floor and hid their eyes in fear. They were not of healthy mind. And they didn't believe their rescuers were really there to rescue them. And the SEALs stood there not knowing what to do. They couldn't possibly carry everybody out. And one of the SEALs got an idea. He put down his weapon. He took off his helmet. He curled up tightly next to the other hostages, getting so close his body was touching some of theirs. He softened the look on his face and he put his arms around them. And he was trying to show them that he was one of them. None of the prison guards would have done this. And he stayed there for a little while until some of the hostages started to look at him, finally meeting his eyes. And the Navy SEAL whispered that they were American and they were there to rescue them. "Will you follow us?" he said. And the hero stood to his feet, and one of the hostages did the same, and then another, until all of them were willing to go. And the story ends with all the hostages safe on an American aircraft carrier. Well, I love the thought of Jesus being like that Navy SEAL, identifying with us, coming to us, getting involved with our mess so that we would be able to trust him. And I love that what we read of him was that he came down to earth and he healed people. He loved people. He cared deeply about how people were feeling. And when I understand that the decision to follow Jesus was very much like the decision of those hostages that they had to make, I knew then that I needed to decide whether or not I would follow him. And here's what I got straight in my mind way back when I was only 12 years old. You don't have to be over 18 to do this. These were the things I got straight. Am I being held captive in a world where selfishness is rife and darkness rules? Yes. Is Jesus the Son of God, and did he come to rescue me? Yes, I believe that. Do I believe Jesus can rescue me from my condition and give me a hope and a future? Yes. I believed it when I was 12. I'm now 49. And I still believe it. In fact, I know it even more than I did back then. You know, just like that Navy SEAL, Jesus came to rescue you and me. He became human like us, crouching beside us in our brokenness, putting his arms around our shoulders, asking us to follow him out of captivity, out of that darkness, into light, leading us to life. You just need the courage to get up, to leave the darkness of that room and throw off those chains that he has unlocked and follow him. Psalm 119, verse 73. And I'm finishing with this so the group can come up. It says this. The psalmist writes, "You made me. You created me. Now give me the sense to follow your commands." Gosh, don't we need that? If God made us, if he created us, like Jill said, if he knows you better than anybody else, better than you know yourself, he knows the plans he has for you. He knows what is good and perfect and pleasing for your life. He knows it. Lord, now give us the sense, give us the courage to follow your commands. Let's pray. Father, I know how tough it can be to follow you. Lord, I know that following you doesn't make me immune from any problems in this world. In fact, Jesus, you told us that in this world we will have many trials. But to take heart because you have overcome the world. And so, Lord, I take heart in you. I thank you that you came to rescue me. I thank you that you didn't just come, you've taken me out of that place of darkness. Lord, you've brought me alive again. And Lord, I pray that you would help me to follow you more clearly. Give me the sense to follow your commands. Lord, to experience that good, that pleasing, that perfect will that you have for me. And Lord, for anybody here this morning who doesn't yet know you, Lord, I pray that they would hear your voice calling them to. Lord, I pray that they would just have the courage to look up, to meet your eyes, to experience your love. Lord, and to go your way. Just thank you that you made a way for us, Jesus. You continue to do that. And I trust you. Amen. Amen. Let's stand together.